Hello everyone, welcome to the next session on SAP UI5. In the last episode of UI5, we have talked about how to create table control in SAP UI5 and how to do aggregation binding with table control rows. In today's class, we will go ahead and discuss about how to use different variety of columns as part of table. We will also discuss about element binding, which is the last type of binding in SAP UI5. Let's get started. So what we have seen by far, creating a very simple table with the JSON data, as you can see on the screen. This is the table which we created. We also applied a custom CSS on this table. And then you can see that there are a lot of different records in the table. Now, if I quickly look at the table, you see the data which is displayed in the table is all in the text format. But SAP UI5 was introduced as a main UX strategy by SAP not to do these things. Basically, the idea is to make the user interface more intuitive for business users rather than just conventional SAP UI based applications. So if your mindset is still remains with SAP UI design, you will not be able to leverage the power of SAP UI5. So just keep it in mind. You have to come out of conventional SAP GUI mindset if you truly want to leverage the power of UI5. And SAP GUI mindset was more and more data was always in the text format inside the table. So now we will change this game with SAP UX strategy using SAP UI5 and see how can we have a different variety of table with different variety of columns to make it intuitive for business users. In addition to do these things, we will put some effort now to change these columns instead of pure text columns to different variety of columns. So you see here a gender column which is displaying it as a male and female text. I would like to change it to simple icons. I want to display user an icon for the gender rather than displaying user these hard-coded texts. So let's come back to our UI program. So can anybody tell me, if you remember in the last class, which property or which aggregation of your column controls the behavior or controls the type of the column it is going to be? Which property, which aggregation of your column? Absolutely right, Srini. It's the template. It's the template aggregation of the column which controls the behavior, which controls how is my column is going to be constructed. So here you see this gender column. I have connected this with the text property of text view control. I will change this. Now before changing this, we got to also change our data. So this is our data. Here our data is available in the text format. I will change this. I will go to Google, and on the google.com I will search for female icons. Okay, so let me just go to Google and search for some female icon, and I should be able to find a couple of them. Go to images, and you can see there are a lot of different female icons available on Google. Yeah, so maybe I will pick it up, any one of them, maybe this one. Right click on this icon and say copy image address. Okay, copy image address, that's what you should copy. Come back to WebIDE, and wherever you find female as the data in the gender, we will change this. Okay, so we will change this data. Control F, again Control F for replacing the content, and wherever you see it's a female, I'm going to replace it with my URL and replace all, and you see all the places the female was replaced with this text, with this URL. Okay, similarly let's come back and search for a male icon, and you would find once again many of them. So maybe I will pick this one, right click and copy image address, come back, and wherever I find male, I will replace this with the new URL which I've got. All the places I'm replacing, voila. You see all the places it got replaced quite nicely. I save my data, and now I come back and change this to an image control. Okay, so instead of a text view control, we will use image control, And remember, for image control, there is a property called SRC property, which I will now bind with our gender column once again, gender property in the JSON once again. So it's again a relative path. So just have to put gender. Don't need to put slash emp tab slash gender, because emp tab is already connected to my table, which is the absolute path. And within this absolute path, there is a relative path called gender. There is a relative property, which means this is a property inside the emp tab, which is a relative path. I will do the binding. Okay, save this. Now I see still the WebIDE is showing me a red. There's an unexpected token. It's showing me unexpected token. And let me check what is the reason of this unexpected token. Yes, there is an extra parenthesis at the end. I'll remove this, save it, and now let's quickly execute once again our application. So this port number now I think would have got changed. Yes, so we have to rerun our application quite once and then open it in a new window one more time quickly. So let me just go to new window and open this up. So this port number changes typically, and now you see beautiful. So you see male and female icons are now popping up inside your table, but it has distorted the table because of size of the icon. So we can control this size quite easily. We can come back to our image control, put comma, and then control the width and height property for the image. So width, sorry, once again, just give me a second. Yeah, width property, I will make it as 20 pixels, or let's say 30 pixels, as well as the height property, I will make it 30 pixels. So 30 by 30, I want to restrict my image into. And I come back, refresh the page one more time, and beautiful. You see how nicely your table looks like now with these icons. More intuitive in nature, looks beautiful as compared to other user interface which you use in any other SAP technology. Similarly, now we will change this guy smoker. You see, it's always a Boolean value. So what is the best fit control for a Boolean value, true or false? Anybody? Which control do you think, which UI control do you think best fit for a Boolean value? Yes, no, check, uncheck, something of that sort. Switch, yeah, makes sense. Or checkbox also makes sense. Check and uncheck. Quite easily, user can make themselves a non-smoker and smoker. So we can definitely go ahead and make it because so we don't go by icon here in this case, red and green, because user may quit smoking. In that case, you have to uncheck the checkbox. If it's an icon, then you have to click on the icon, and you have to additionally code a lot of things to change the icon type, right? So that we don't want to get into. So we will go with simple nature, which is achieved using checkbox control. So I come back, smoker here, and then we just change this text view in the template once again to a checkbox control. And then we have a checked property, I guess. Let me see if it is there. Check property, and I will just do the mapping with smoker. Uh, Save this. Let's come back, refresh the page, and voila, what a nice example. You see now the column have been turned into a checkbox, and if let's say anybody who joins the smokers club, we can quickly check the guy, and if somebody comes out of smoking, we can uncheck. Quite easy experience rather than text-based data. It makes it intuitive, it makes it meaningful for the business users to look at this. That's what you need to work with the mindset with UI5. Don't work with the mindset of conventional SAP GUI when it comes to UI control. Of course, the functionality behavior could be the same behavior, but when it comes to controls, when it comes to design, think about intuitive design. Try using new controls, try using the power of UI5. Similarly, now we will go with marital status. Let's say recently one of our employee got married, and we want to change the marital status from single to married. Okay, so that should be pretty much possible for you. And what do you think, which is a possible control when it comes to choosing out of multiple values? Which control do you think would make sense when it comes to choosing out of multiple values? Anybody? list box or a drop down or a checkbox, of course not. Drop down makes more sense. A list box makes more sense. Absolutely. So we will now have to bring in a list box or a drop down control in this marital status. Yep. So let's do that. So we will come here and you see this is M status. We will change this M stat to a drop down control. Let me see if there is a drop down control. It's not showing. Let me just check. What is the control name? I will go to UI5 SDK and search here for the control name for, let's say, drop down. If it is there in the SAP UI Commons library, because currently library which I'm using is Commons. Of course, I know that there's a control drop down in Fiori library, SAP M library, but not sure in UI Commons. So let me be sure. So I just come and search for drop down. And yes, drop down box control is available. I go inside. Now drop down have multiple values, guys. And out of those multiple values, only one value is selected at a time. How will you bring the drop down items, those multiple values? How will you bring it? So to bring that, let's look at the parent control. It's combo box control. So I will go to the parent control, which is the combo box control. And now I go to aggregations and you see here there's an items. Okay. So you can see it's an items, and items is an aggregation of the combo box control, which means it will also come to your drop down box control. So you can use a drop down box, and then in the items you can add multiple items. SAP UI core list item is the SAP UI core list item is the class which will bring in the item for you. Okay, so we will add a drop down box. So drop down D, drop down D is capital, D is small, drop down box, and then we're gonna bring in here items, which is an aggregation, and then of course the text property, which will be binded to the data in the JSON and marital status. And now you have to create two items. One is married and uh, one is married, one is single. So this is my items, and if you just quickly look at the UI now, you will see a nice drop down would appear, but this drop down now don't have any data. See, doesn't have any data. Why? Because you have not yet added the items in the drop down. Since it doesn't have items, it cannot also pick an item from the text property. It cannot assign a value to it also. Even though the binding is given, you don't see the value which we gave in JSON is not available at all, because the drop down item itself is not available to select from. So we got to add now these items, and each item is of type which object. Let's go to SDK. It's of type SAP UI core list item class. Click here, core list item class. So of course, whenever you create a drop down, you will have a key value pair, right? In SAP GUI also we have key value pair. WebDinro, VSP, any technology you look at, it's always a key value pair. Now if I go to properties, do I see a key value pair property here? Anybody? Do you find a key and value pair property? No, you don't find. What shall I do? If you don't find property in a class, what is your ideal practice? Perfect answer, Chandra. You have to go to super class. Yes, you're right. So we will go to the super class, which is UI core item class in this case. Let's click on that and let's go to properties. And can you find key and value, key and text pair now here for the drop down in this particular properties? Of course, yes, which means these properties will get inherited automatically to the child class also. Okay. So let's go back, and now we will use this SAP UI core item class. So core list item class, and then it will have always the text and key property which is coming from core item base class. So let's go ahead and add it. So I will come here and let me do that. So let's say new SAP UI core list item, and then it has a key and it has a text property. So let me just add it. So key is single, for S is the key, and text is single, and then we have another item UI core list item, and then key, and then we will put here married. We'll use text as married. Great. So that's it. We're saving it, and we will now ready to see the magic. Refresh the page, and voila, you see the employees who has the data is now appearing, but you see all of them are coming as single, but that's incorrect. If you look at our JSON data, we have many employees who are married, right? Why this data is not being picked up properly? So this could be possibly the reason of this text property. Since text may not be a right property to map with, let's go to the drop down box once again and check it in the SDK what is the right property which will bring in the values inside a drop down. So I come here and I see search help text. No, none of these will put into my requirement. So I'll go to the base class to check. I go to the base class, and now I go to the properties one more time, and we have selected key, of course makes some sense, but once again I go to another base class. You see it's a text field class, and which property of text field control will bring in the values? Anybody? We have already used this control, text field control. All the properties of text field absolutely gets inherited, so value property makes more sense. So let's come here and map mstat with the value property, which is actually coming from text field base class to the drop down box. Let's map it, refresh the page, and there you go. You see now the values are being populated correctly based on your input data supplied. And let's say see recently Webber got married, and then we can just simply change it to married status. So that's the intuitiveness what you will get with this new set of controls. Let's see some more interesting stuff. I want to display both salary and currency together in a single column. Okay, in a single column, both the salary and currency in a single column. How can I achieve it? Pretty easy. Just come back to salary and currency, take this currency binding, copy the binding and put it next to salary. That's it. You can see now both the values separated with space will be displayed in that particular salary column. Okay, I do this, come back, refresh the page, and voila, you see 150 euros, 250 US dollar, 350 US dollar, all that is being coming up now together in a single column. This is the complex binding type. Remember, if you're doing any complex binding, you have to make sure that you have added this data SAP UI XX binding syntax equals to complex. Otherwise, this binding will not work. Okay, very important point to note that if you're doing this kind of binding where you're using multiple properties together in a binding, make sure that you add in the bootstrap complex binding type syntax. Okay, now this column is of unused. Let's reuse this column for rating indicator. So I will come here rating and change the control type as rating indicator. Okay, and then I'm not sure, but maybe there will be a value column, I guess so, because I see it's an input type and it will inherit all the properties from text field control. And then maybe I will just quickly add the mapping for rating. So let's go here and we have a rating property created, which we will map it now. Again, which path is this? Anybody? Which path is this? Anyone? Last class I've explained you which path is this. If in an interview somebody asks you, absolutely right, Chandra, he has got all the right answers today. It's a relative path. Relative path. Okay, it's not an absolute path because it's relative to the parent, and parent is binded to the table rows aggregation emp table. Save this. Let's come back and refresh, and there you go. And then you can see rating indicator, but image is not that proper because of we are in the theme for SAP blue crystal theme. That's why rating indicator image is not populating properly. Okay, it's an obsolete control, and you see there's this issue which is coming. Okay, so it is not looking that great actually. Ideally rating indicator should look that great, but it's not. That's fine, it's okay. Now you will see here, maybe I will change this to just a text view control instead of rating indicator. So let me just come back. We will probably show only the text field. and refresh. So you'll see the values now being populated. Great. So next, what we want to see here, we want to change multi-select option to single select. Only user should be able to select one row at a time. Now for that, we will go to UI5 SDK and check for the documentation of table control. And let's come to UI table. Don't ever go to SAP M table. If you are working with SAP UI table, why are you checking documentation of this table? Okay, this is a very common and often mistake which beginners will do. They will start looking into documentation of M table, and then they come, Anubhav, this property is not working. Then when I cross check, I find that they are looking in SAP M library, but they have used control from SAP UI table library, which is here. Okay, so don't do this type of mistakes. Come back to the table, and now we will look at how can we influence the selection mode of the table. Something should be there in the properties or aggregation to change this behavior, how the data will be selected in terms of table rows. We want to switch it to a single selection rather than multi-selection. So current default mode which you see in the UI is multi-select mode. I want to probably bring it to a single select mode. So let's see how can we do that. So first investigate the properties. Now here in these properties, do you see any property out of these which you think can influence how can we change the row selections? Anybody? Do you think any property? Selection mode property? Yes, makes sense. So let's try this selection mode, and you see the constant is given here, which is the constant, what are the possible input for the selection mode. I go inside selection mode and you will see the list of selection modes over there. So I will come here and you can see these are all the different selection modes we have. So we will just quickly go to our code and just increase this. Yeah, so we will just come to the table control. Here is our table, and just put selection mode, and I'm now can choose the mode based on my needs. So you see multi-select, toggle, none, single. Yeah, we will go with single. Sorry, we'll go with single select. So there you go. I had put the single select mode. I save this, and let's come back. You see right now it's a multi-select, and refresh. And there you go. Now the table is in a single select mode. What an amazing feature. Thanks to UI5 SDK helping me out by finding all the possible cause, all the possible things which I can use. You can indeed run your UI5 app in any browser, as we discussed in the past, the benefits of UI5. So I can, let's see if I have Mozilla installed. I will try to run it in Mozilla browser. Oops, I don't have Mozilla. Let me just quickly download Mozilla Firefox, one of another best browsers. So let me just quickly do that. In the meantime, we will also continue. By the time it downloads, I will continue. So let me just download Mozilla, because what is happening is when I'm increasing the zoom level for my Chrome browser, it's increasing everywhere. Even my output ke liye, it's increasing. And I need increased zoom level to show you the code. So I don't want my increased zoom level for the other thing. Okay, it's opening UC. I don't want UC. I want Mozilla. Let me just go here. Yes, this is the correct one. And let's download. Click here. Yes, it's downloading. Let me just quickly start the setup and continue with our discussions. Okay, great. So now it will in parallel install my Mozilla for me. Great. So now what we next need to do is when we select a record. Now, if you remember, there is a functionality, very popular functionality in conventional SAP. Whenever I select a record, the corresponding data should get populated in my input fields, right? This is functionality is called master detail functionality, right? So when you select something from the master record, the detail record gets loaded in the below set of input fields. Typically, if you see this functionality in case of sales order, purchase order, where you enter a line item, and when you select a line item in below tabs, you will see all the data for that particular line item gets loaded, right? How can we achieve this particular stuff over here? That should be practically possible, right? So to achieve that, it is very, very simple. We can achieve this quite easily. Okay, now my Mozilla is up and running. Let me just copy this and put it in my Mozilla browser just to also be very sure. Okay, now since I'm already running it in the Chrome browser, it's not allowing me to launch it in the Mozilla. So it's giving me authorization error. Let me just quickly close and re-execute. And then let's try now in Mozilla if I'm able to run the response in Mozilla. No, it's not allowing me, guys. Okay, there's some problem. Maybe we will try it later. So for timing, I will switch back to the Chrome browser. Okay, so when I select a record now, what I want is I want the corresponding selected record to be loaded in the below set of input fields. That's called master detail functionality. How can we achieve that here in the how can we achieve this in this case of Fiori, or in case of UI5? So to do that, we need to first find out the right event which gets triggered when you select a record of the table, correct? So that is first thing which we need to do. So let's go back to UI5 SDK and go back to our table control documentation and just try to see, is there any event available which gets triggered whenever I select the record. Okay, that's our first and foremost importance. Okay, so that's the first step towards this example. We need to find, is there any event which triggers when you select a record, and possibly there has to be. Yeah, that's how you can implement functionality. Otherwise, how will you implement? So you see events, I go there and I will go to summary, and now you see there are a lot of events for the table control. So anybody, can you guess out of these events, which event do you think will trigger whenever I select a record? Anybody? Whenever I select a record in the table, which event do you think will trigger? Row selection change. Perfect answer. You see fired when row selection in the table has been changed. It's written also clearly what is the need of it. Row selection change event. So maybe we can test it quickly. So we will go back and just add it for the table level. So where's my table? Here it is. And I say row selection change. Be careful. It's case sensitive. R is small. Selection change. C is capital. And O controller dot, and I can just now put here row selected. And this event, of course, event handler I have to implement in our controller. Let's come here and put a comma after the previous method, and then row selected function. You can put the functions in any order, it doesn't matter. I can put this row selected on the top of the controller also, it doesn't matter. Order doesn't matter. Okay, now I will just put a simple alert and I say wow. Yeah, so that's what I want to just test if this is the right event I have subscribed to. I will come back, refresh the page. Don't forget to refresh, and let's select, and voila, you see it says wow. That means we have successfully subscribed to the correct event in the table. So that's how you can do an initial test of your event, whether it's a right event or incorrect event you've selected from the list of the SDK documentation. So this one is luckily correct. We have selected the right event, which means it's triggering now the code, but the story begins just now. So now we have to find that which row was selected, right? Now, before we go into this, basically we need to understand the event object concept. So whenever you click on something, you are clicking one of the record of the table. So there has to be some information you should know about this event. User is doing an activity causing an event to trigger. So I am user, I select a record, and this is an activity by me on the UI which is causing an event to trigger. Now this event should have some information about which record was selected. Then only you can map that record data to the input fields, correct? So you should know which record out of nine records, which record user has selected, correct? And that information should be available somewhere. And that actually comes with the event object. Now to understand the event object concept, I have a nice example over here, very practical life example over here. So let me just switch to the presentation mode and show you this practical example. Okay, sorry, I have to switch from the same PPT. Yes. Now, can anybody guess what is this? Anyone? What do you think is this? Anyone? You might have seen this. This is the largest building near any airport. Any airport, if you have visited in your life, we typically have this is the largest. Yes, it's called ATC, Air Traffic Controller, which manages all the traffic coming towards and going by the airport. Air Traffic Controller building, which is there on an airport. It's the largest building near any airport. Okay, and then on top of this, there is a radar. And this radar is in radar engineering. In our engineering days, we have learned about this radar engineering. So in radar, what happens is it sends electromagnetic waves, and these electromagnetic waves are continuously sent. And whenever there is an object flying in the sky, it the electromagnetic waves gets observed. Okay, all this gets observed by the sky, but if it collides with an airplane, if it collides with an object in the sky, the waves reflect back. Okay, so if there is an airplane, the wave goes, collides with the airplane, and it reflect back, and this reflection is again captured by the radar. So you will see this radar will be continuously moving 360-degree. That's why what it is doing, it's sending and receiving the waves which are going and coming, right? So that's what your radar and transponder does. And then finally, with that, it will trace the location of an object in the sky, saying that okay, there is a small dot on the CRT screen which indicates there is an object in the sky. And by continuously sending it and receiving it, it also finds the speed of that object and height of that object. Okay, with the reference height concept, it finds the height of the object, at what height the plane is flying, and at what speed the plane is flying. But but radar cannot tell you that this plane is coming from Russia, India, Japan, from where it is coming from. Okay, radar cannot tell you. It just identifies an object. Sometime you might have seen in movies that when there is some military operation going on, the radar detects an airplane, but they cannot tell that is it an enemy airplane or is this our airplane, correct? Because radar doesn't have this capability. Now, how does the ATC knows that this plane or this object which is coming is a military plane or a passenger plane or a cargo plane, and which country this plane belongs to? That it cannot tell, radar cannot tell. So what happens is, let's say there is a plane coming from Russia, Romania, there's another plane coming from Japan, and then there is another plane coming from India. So there are three planes, Russia, Japan, and Indian Airlines. So these three planes are coming from three different directions. Radar detects its position. Now what air traffic controller does, it contacts these planes. Okay, and then it asks the first plane, where are you coming from? Now what happens is, this particular plane sends a radio signal. Okay, it sends a radio signal to the air traffic controller, saying that hey, this is Mr. James coming from Russia, Romania. I am at 33,000 miles, and I will be reaching to the airport in next 30 minutes. Then the next plane, which is coming from Japan, Honolulu, it says, "Hey, Mr. This is Chuchu, and I'm coming from Japan, Honolulu, and I will be flying towards the to John F. Welsh Kennedy Airport, and I will be reaching in next 20 minutes. I'm left over with only 1 hour gallon fuel in my tank." And then there's this third plane coming from Delhi, India, which will inform, "This is Rajesh pilot coming from India, and I will be reaching to JFWTC airport in next 20 minutes, and I'm left over with 2 hours of fuel. My current height is 13,000 miles." So these three planes sends these radio waves, but they are actually non-human readable. Now these radio waves are received by ATC, and this is actually an event. In this event, lot of information is hidden. So when this event is received by the ATC, the information is extracted from the event. So this event object has information, guys, and this information gets extracted by ATC. Okay, so any object which is received here has information inside, with which ATC knows that this plane is coming from which country, who is the pilot, what is the purpose, and by when it will reach. So all these reduced signals will be sent by airplanes to ATC to identify themselves. Same concept happens here in our life with UI5. In UI5, imagine this is your UI control. A plane is equivalent to a UI control. Now this is a UI control. A UI control, when user does an activity, when user click on a button on a table, it raises an event object, and this event object is received by event handler method, right? You just now saw when I clicked on a row of a table, it has caused an event to trigger, and that event was received, and in that it triggered our alert function, wow, right? Same thing happening here. So an event handler method gets triggered, so there is an event object also which is sent to the event handler object. This event object is defaultly sent always to the event handler method. Now it's up to the event handler method to receive and extract the information or discard it, right? ATC can ignore the message. ATC can also read the message and use the information, correct? So that's what happens here. We will now see that event object which is sent by the control, UI control, to the method. So this is control, this is the event object which has information inside, and this is your event handler method. Okay, it was important for me to take this example so that you can relate it with the real life. Let's go back to the system now, and we will see this event object for the first time. So you can see this is your event handler, your ATC, and now we will write an event object here. Let me just say O Anubhav. That's the event object I'm writing, O Anubhav, and that's it. I will now just put a debugger just to show you debugging. How do you debug and find this information from this event object? Now remember guys, you can name anything whatever you like here, but this will be the default event object what you will receive from the control, from the UI control. Okay, let's do that. So we will come here and experience this. So let's go back, refresh the page. Now your debugger will only and only open if you are in the console mode, which means if your developer tools are open, then only your event object will trigger, otherwise not. So I come here. Now my console mode is open, my developer toolbar is open, and I choose a row, and it should hit the debugger. There you go. You see it's hitting the debugger. We are interested now to look at this O Anubhav, which is the event object. You see this event object has values, correct? So let's take this O Anubhav, go to console, put this event object here, press enter. You see this is your event object. This has information about what was done by user. Just like the radio signal sent by plane has information about plane, its height, its altitude, its pilot name, and other stuff. Similarly, this event object which was received has information about the event. Then of course this is very valuable for us, because you will see out of 10 rows, user can choose any of the row, and then that particular row we should be using and extracting the information. So as a O Anubhav dot get parameters, there's a method of this event object get parameters, and that gives you all the parameters of the event. You see there are different parameters like row index. So now you see, you know which row was selected by user. Row context, that gives you the information about path which was selected. So if I go to row context, you see this is the path of the selected record. Do you remember in the last to last chapter I explained about how to create path for JSON? So if it's a if it's a fourth record of the JSON, you see fourth record 200, 1, 2, 3. It's a fourth record. Index starts with 0, so it becomes /emp tab 3. That's my path of the selected record. Very important. This path is very, very helpful. In fact, you also got the index value. Lot of different properties you have got. Now, if you are in a multi-select mode, you will get a row indices and array. In this array, you will get all the list of indexes selected by user. Yeah, that will also be available in this event object. So event object in one sense is very, very helpful. What is the standard practice in SAP? The standard practice is the event object name should be O event. That's a standard practice. Every event handler method will receive the event object, and based on the UI control, their properties may different, their parameters may different. Okay, Very important. So now I will just want to get this row context parameter information. So I will just call a single method Anubhav dot get parameter, and I will pass here the parameter name. Press enter and you see we have got the parameter value. And now if I just want to get the path, I call dot get path because there is a path property, and then I will get the path of the selected element. So you see, out of multiple records, you can also call these multiple records as multiple elements. One particular element was selected, and this element's path is here. So this is the code to get the path of the selected element. Okay, so I will just come here, create a variable element path equals to my code, which I already tested. Now remember, we changed the object name to OEvent, so it should be OEvent, and that's my step number one. This is my step number one. Get the path of the selected element. Now, what is an element? Why am I calling it as an element? Is because this is the memory location. You see, there are multiple records here, and each record corresponds to a memory. Okay, so this is one record. This whole thing is one record that is corresponding to one element, one memory location. There is another record that corresponds to another element, another memory location. So similarly, for all the records in the table, when the binding gets done, multiple elements corresponding to each record gets created. Okay, multiple elements corresponding to each record gets created. So if you look at your table once again, if you look at your table example, so for each record you will get one element. So now if you just come here, let's come here, and for each record of the table you will see one memory gets allocated, and that's nothing but your element. So this is element 1. So how many elements will get created when you do the binding, when you do aggregation binding? How many elements gets created? Anybody? Very important interview question. Perfect. N number of elements, and that is absolutely equal to number of records in your JSON data. Okay, number of records in the JSON data. So element 1, 2, 3, and so on, all the elements gets created, all the memory gets allocated. Basically, this is the memory, actual memory where data is residing. Okay, this is the actual memory where data is residing. So these many elements are getting created corresponding to each record which you see on the UI. Now what I can do is, this element inside has all the data. Okay, this element inside, this memory inside has all the data for your record. Now what I can take is, take this element and map directly it with my input field. Make sense? So that all the data of selected record gets transferred to my input field correspondingly. So this, if you see 203, it's one cell, and this 203 now can fit here, it can come here. Srinivas is the name of employee, it can fit here. Then salary 900, that property can fit here. Then currency USD can come and fit here. So basically, I want to transfer my element data which I selected to my input field. That's what I want. Okay, transfer the element data, the memory which is allocated by this record is an element, and that element's data I want to transfer to set of input fields which are grouped inside a simple form. So there is a simple form which we had designed in the last class. Inside the simple form we have a lot of input fields, and we will be binding now our element with this simple form directly. Okay, and this is now called as element binding. Okay, hope this is clear. All four types of binding we are discussing here, we had discussed in the previous classes, the property binding, expression binding, and also we had discussed about the aggregation binding in our previous classes of UI5. You can see here in the PPT all four type of bindings. Last one is element binding, which I'm explaining here. When you bind one of the element out of multiple element to another set of controls, that becomes an element binding, and that happens with the help of path which we derived. So we just have to get the path of this guy, path of this element, and we just have to do a binding with the simple form. Okay, so with the simple form we will be doing the binding. with, actually this is now binded with simple form with the absolute path. Okay, and then within this path, within this element, the relative path will be binded to the input fields. So let's go ahead and do this. How can we achieve element binding? Pretty easy to achieve this. We have to get the object of the simple form first of all, and then we will be doing this. Now remember guys, same concept applies to XML views also. Right now in this case we are using JavaScript view, so once we reach to our next set of chapters we will see XML views. That concept even applies to XML views. So using the code only you will do the element binding. So we will do JavaScript code to do element binding. Now let's come back and obtain the simple form object. So this is our simple form which we created. Let's give an ID to this guy. Let me just zoom in a little bit, and I just give it an ID simple and just put comma, and let's use the simple. Come here and I say var o simple form equals to SAP UI get core. That gives me the runtime instance of our application by ID. Put the ID of the simple form, we got the object, and then I will say this dot bind element, and I'm just going to pass the path of the table over here. That's it, we are done. That's called element binding. Now this is binded to the absolute path. So an absolute path is now connected to the simple form, which is basically /emp tab /row number, whatever user selects. So every time user select a row, this event will trigger, which will read the path of the selected event, and that path gets binded based on row number to the simple form. As a result, simple form gets connected to that particular element. Now its sub children's, simple form's children's are these. These children's also now we want to connect to the data. So we can just put the relative path, EMP number and EMP name, then salary property, of course, and then we have, for the last currency, we will bind it with CURR. That's it. That's a relative path now within this. We are not changing the other bindings. We are still keeping it with the singleton structure of JSON, but only the main value binding I'm changing for the property with relative path to now relative to the simple form. Okay, let's go and check it now. The response on the UI, refresh the page, and let's see what happens. So you see by default now no data in the input fields. The moment I select a record, voila, you see it's loading the corresponding record data in my input fields. That's the power of element binding concept. What an amazing concept. Element binding, the corresponding selected record gets loaded into the input fields. Okay, so there are multiple concepts which we discussed today. In fact, these are one of the most important concepts. Binding concept itself is the most important concept in UI5. Okay, very, very important concept in UI5. Relative path, absolute path, expression binding, which we did yesterday to yesterday's class, property binding, aggregation binding, which we did in yesterday's class, and today we did element binding. Time for your questions. One by one, please shoot up your questions. Let's have a look at the questions. How do we provide search help? I will come to that unit. Once I will come to that unit, I will show you how to code or provide search help. So we will be using fragment concept to achieve the search help along with F4 help for the input fields. Okay, so we will take up that in our upcoming chapter, how to do F4 helps and search helps with respect to input fields. So please, I request you to right now park this question. I will take this up in upcoming days. Okay, so Anubhav, which event is raised? So when you select a table record, as I mentioned, the row selection change event got triggered, and that event we have captured, right? And with that event, we have extracted the information about the selected element path and binded the element binded that element with the simple form below. Okay, please, if you can repeat the element binding again. Yeah, sure, I will do that. How do you know that there is a get parameter method? It's default. Always for any event object, there will be get parameter method. Okay, for any event object, there will be get parameter method. You can also come to UI5 SDK and check here. So you see these are all the different events you have. Maybe I will go to row selection change event, and you see this is the event object. Now here it is telling, and you see there is this get parameters method, and these are all the different parameters which are available within this event object. So UI5 SDK helps me to find out the methods. Get source method is also there, get parameters method is also there. Within this, what are all the different parameters for this event they are displaying? Okay, if you go to different control, you will find different event, but event object will have again have get parameters method and get parameter method, and different parameters will be there. So get parameter and parameters method are default for every event object. The parameters may change based on control to control. Maybe I will quickly show you that. So I will go to maybe another control, let's say shell control, and it's a part of UI UX3 as well as M library as well. Maybe I will just quickly see this shell, this guy over here, very popular control which was earlier available with UI5, but now this library have been deprecated. So I will just quickly click on this, and just to show you an event object or any event for this particular shell control, and then we will investigate quickly the event parameters. So let me just come click on this. In the meantime, let's come down and let's just look at the events. So you see these are all the events. I go to one of the event, and you see this is the event, and there is a get parameters method, and these are all the parameters for this control now. Okay, so it depends on each control. Methods get source and get parameters are always there for every event object, but number of parameters and the name of parameters may differ based on event to event, control to control. Okay, when I say control, I mean UI control here. Okay, now let me quickly read through these questions, and then I will quickly last time repeat the element binding once again. Okay, can you download these SAP UI apps to your WebIDE and put in a blog? We are already doing it, Pradeep. So you see this is our training blog, and I'm already daily posting our uh, our code, whatever we are coding here in the projects section. So you can download directly these projects and put it in your WebIDE and simply run it. It will work without any dependency. I'm already putting the source code of all our projects on daily basis in our training blog. This will be, once again, this will be the central point of learning hub for you for our entire training. You will see all the presentations will be uploaded here. All the important links will be updated here. All the links for your learning will be updated. All the class schedule, the session recordings, whatever sessions we have covered by far are all available in this blog. So you see we have covered all the basics of HTML5, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery, MVC architecture, introduction to UI5, complementary OOPS app tutorials, uh, view types, open UI5, JSON model, binding modes, tables, and today we are covering the element binding concept. So all these videos will keep on coming here in our blog, so you can watch them later point of time. If you miss the class, or if you want to repeat things, it's already there for you, available all in the blog. Okay, I will show the code once again, guys. Hold on. I will repeat the element binding once again. Let me just quickly look through the other questions. Can you make the whole column gray? Yeah, that's completely possible. UI5 doesn't become a bottleneck for developer. It's pretty much simple. If you want to make any of the column gray color, just right click, inspect this, and just find the right element, or the basically the binding type, sorry, the class name for the control. So let me just come here and quickly highlight an element, and you can see it's a UI table cell class. I take this, come here, and just apply my jQuery dollar symbol dot my class name dot css, and then I can say color. This is already covered in our previous chapter, how to apply CSS using jQuery. I also discussed about JavaScript and jQuery in our previous classes, so please look at the old classes if you were that point of time were not present. So look at the videos, and I maybe say gray, and I want to change maybe the background color, not the color. So background property, and you see all the cells got converted into the gray color. Yeah, so that's something which you can quite easily achieve using using CSS, UI5 doesn't become a bottleneck for you guys. SAP UI5 is truly a real UI technology in this case. Okay, so you want to make it grayed out. Okay, that is also possible. Once again, you have this feature called property, which we created for element binding, magic property here. These input fields you want to grade out, that should be also possible. So whenever I select a record, I want these input fields to become grayed out. Very much possible. Let's come back and I'll just quickly show you this. Indeed, I have discussed it in our previous class also. Once again, I'm repeating it. You can use our model object and change the property value. So let's say var o model equals to SAP UI get core dot get model, and then we will just say o model dot set property, and we have slash emp str. That's the path magic property, and I just want to make this property value to false, and that's what is binded to our input fields as I discussed in the past. And the moment I do this, all our input field will become grayed out. Refresh the page. Watch here. Currently, I can change the data. You see, it's possible, but I will just select a record and you see two fields have become grayed out. These two did not because we have an expression binding done at their level, right? So if employee number is less than 200, then only it will make my employee number grayed out. Let me do that expression binding change quickly to show you that it really works. So I'll come back, and this is an expression binding for employee number. If it is less than, let's say, 500, then I want to make it grayed out. So refresh, select it. Sorry. This should be, if it is, condition should change. If it is greater than. Okay, now another problem here is you see this employee number binding have changed now. We have to put the relative path, not the absolute path. Refresh now, and now you will see for the different conditions. So of course the condition has to change. So the condition is it has made false. Maybe we can just directly connect it to our magic field, or we can change this condition as well. And let's try now. There you go. Your input fields are also becoming grayed out for employee number now based on the condition. And I can also put a special condition here. If employee name is Jennifer, then also make the employee name as grayed out. So that is something expression binding we discussed in the previous class. Hope you all remember. So dollar and then your property name, emp name, and if it is equals to Jennifer, which I have to put it in single quotes, and then let's come back, refresh. There's a problem in our expression. I think it should be double equals to. Okay, I'm not sure if it is. Maybe I'll just try not equals to operator with dollar $emp name. If it is not equals to this, then make it magic. Okay, let's try now. It's not working. There is some problem. Maybe I need to cross check this. We're running already out of time, guys. Maybe I will cross check this and come back. So right now just replace it with the hard coded condition one more time and show you the response. So based on your expression, what you code, it will be available. It will be making this field grayed out. Hope that clear your doubt. Can you download SAP GUI apps from your WebIDE? Yeah, already did that. Now column of the table. Okay, so we do this before the table, a particular column is required. I did not get your questions, guys. In this case, we do not do this table before a particular column is required. Yes, you're right. What is the use of grayed out a table cell unless if it is an input field? You are also right. So already your cells which are created are text field, text views. You can't change it. So the question was not to grade out table fields. Question was to grade out these input fields, which I already answered. Now let me quickly repeat the element binding concept. So let's come back quickly here. So what is happening here? We have done an aggregation binding to create table rows. Okay. We have done an aggregation binding here to create table rows. Each row is displayed because there is a memory created for it. And this memory is represented by an element. So for first row, there is first element. For second row, there is second element. For third row, there is third element. For fourth row, there is fourth element, and so on. Based on number of records, you have number of table elements in the allocated. Okay. Now this element contains the memory and address. There is an address for this element also, and that address is slash your path basically. So slash emp tab is completely binded with your complete table, and if I put slash 0, which address to the first element, because index starts with 0 in JavaScript, and then it comes with 1, it addressed to the second element, 2, 3, and so on. Like this, we have multiple elements connected. So that's the address of memory. Path is nothing but address of that memory, that element. Now, the moment I do element binding, based on the index which I put, it picks this element. So if I do slash mp tab slash 1, it picks this guy and takes this data and connect this data with my simple form. So below this, I have my simple form with my input fields. So all the data which I have, this particular records data gets selected. This particular records data gets selected, and this data is sent to the simple form below. Now, as you know that this particular cell can represent by a single input field, this cell, right? Employee number, employee name. So that data gets now supplied to your input fields, employee number, employee name, salary, and so on. It gets supplied to your input fields from this element, from this memory. Okay, and that's what called element binding. For that, we did a bind element to our simple form, so that data from this particular element, this path, will be taken up and binded to simple form. And inside this, whatever cells are there, those cells we have done a relative binding with the input fields. So the data for that cells of that single row gets displayed in input fields. So that's exactly your element binding. Looking into the code once again, we can see here, come down. Okay, so where is it? Go to controller. Of course, it's in the row select event, and you see we are getting the path over here, and then we are saying simple form object, and then we are just binding the element, the memory, to this simple form. Okay, never copy paste the code, guys. If you're copy pasting the code, you are cheating yourself, and trainers who are teaching copy paste, they are cheating you. So never learn from trainers who are doing copy paste, because they, by this means, they will skip teaching you concepts. They will simply, even I can do that. I can have this code ready-made somewhere in a notepad, which typically all the trainers do. They will have this code somewhere in a notepad. They will come, they will say, okay, I have a nice code snippet. If you don't want me to do all the typos and avoid me typing errors, I will do this copy, I will do this paste, and then they will just walk through this code, and they will say, okay, training is done, very good, we have successfully achieved the output. This way you will not learn real concepts. That's why I always recommend beginners to never ever do copy paste. After you get used to the programming, after you get used to each techniques, definitely you should do copy paste, so that you can achieve the desired results. Okay, so that's exactly my motive behind saying no doing copy paste. Okay, how does it match element cell to the input field with simple form? It matches based on your relative path. If you look at here, we have done a relative binding with our input field. So if you come up on the input fields, you see employee number we connected, right? Employee name we connected, employee salary we connected, right? So that's the relative path we have done. With the relative path, it knows that out of that element, which property should come in which input field. So it's done through the relative path binding. Okay, so whole simple form gets connected to that whole record of the table, and within that record all the cells gets connected with the help of this relative path. That's what we discussed in yesterday's class also, the relative path and the absolute path. Absolutely, so row is equal to absolute path and cell is equals to relative path. Perfect answer. That's what exactly I was looking for. You understood the concept of relative and absolute path along with element binding. Now, another quick thing, just wanted to inform you, if you want the latest set of interview questions, feel free to go to my website. I will be soon posting interview questions on SAP UI5 in Fiori on the website. So keep watching this space for latest interview questions on UI5 and Fiori. I will also be posting ABAP on HANA interview questions on our website, so you can keep watching that. Also, I will be posting some new YouTube videos, so please subscribe to my YouTube channel for latest and greatest updates on UI5 Fiori as well as other technologies. So you see all these courses, none of these courses are done using copy paste. All of these things are real things, real metal, real things displayed line by line, writing every single line of code. I don't do copy paste, neither I recommend my students to do copy paste, and never learn from trainers who do copy paste. They are just fooling around. They themselves don't know things. If you ask them questions, they will themselves don't know. They have become self-proclaimed trainers because somewhere they found some samples, they started teaching. कॉपी पेस्ट ही तो करना है और क्या करना है. So this is a joke which trainers are doing on internet. Be careful with those trainers. Don't waste your money behind them. If you really want to do copy paste, there are a lot of different websites which offer free courses. You can learn from them as well. Why do you want to spend your money and time behind such trainers? So be a little careful with that. Okay. So, any other questions before we close today's class? Feel free to get back to me. You can also come back with your questions in the next class. So, see you in the next class. Have a nice day and goodbye, guys.